I went into the release of Dawntrail with hopes, but not with expectations. I've played Final Fantasy XIV for a long time, enough to see the endless complexity of Heavensward jobs slowly peel away layer by layer, making way for a simpler, flashier, more indulgent form of gameplay. I saw encounters exponentially become bigger, deeper, harder and faster. I saw the ups and downs that we as a community have experienced over the years. I didn't expect Dawntrail to blow me away, and I would be content with a decent fun time. That's all I needed. But what I got was enough to make me feel more excited for the future of my favourite game than I have in years. Let's talk about it. Full disclosure, I skipped the story. One day I'll play it, but today is not that day. We won't be talking about that here, and there will be no plot spoilers whatsoever. What there will be are spoilers regarding all of the currently released Dawntrail battle content, including the dungeons, trials and their extreme variants, as well as particular mechanics or components of them. I'll be talking about the positives and negatives, because despite me glazing the expansion hard just a minute or two ago, there are definitely negatives as well. I'll also go a little bit into my hopes for the future based on what we've been presented with, as well as my expectations. There's a lot to talk about. Let's cover the leveling dungeons first, because they make up a big chunk of the accessible content on the whole right now. These dungeons make for the most fun leveling experience I've honestly ever had in this game. Usually when you do leveling dungeons, you expect to see incredibly slow encounters with the most basic mechanics possible, with the intent being that absolutely any player can get through it without any issue. It's rare that there's ever a challenge that pushes a player any further than do an out and in and you have 5 seconds to respond to the really obvious AoE indicator. That was fine enough, and I was never really mad about it because I just accepted that I wasn't the target audience for these pieces of content. This time around, they've done a few things that I've been longing to see for a very, very long time. First of all, boss encounters have shifted up their pacing a noticeable amount. They aren't uncomfortably fast, you still have time to see the telegraph or cast bar, discern what's going to happen, pause for a second or two and then react, but there's significantly less in the way of painfully slow mechanical resolutions in Dawntrail. It just feels like everything is 25% faster this time around. It actually reminds me of a similar shift they made to ultimate encounters back in Endwalker. I believe one of the reasons certain parts of the Omega Protocol Ultimate was especially tough was because they decreased the amount of time you had to react to certain mechanics, a good example of which being party synergy. This put you in a position where you have 1 or 2 seconds less to discern and react to a safe spot than you would have in essentially any other piece of content in the game, which if anything is a fantastic way to prime a player to improve. They've essentially done this but for casual content in Dawntrail. They sped up mechanics but in relatively low stakes content with marginal punishments for failure. Usually you just get a damage down the revolve stack or even just damage and you'll need to fail 2 or 3 times in a row to actually die. So it provides a safe place, relatively speaking, to help elevate the skill level of the average player over time. In doing this, it allows the developers to be a little more gratuitous in their mechanical design. They can make things slightly more complex, a little bit faster, which to me at least means slightly more interesting. There's still the same number of mechanics on the whole per boss, but those mechanics definitely feel like they've been notched up exactly 1 gear from the Endwalker ones. They also hit at least a little bit harder, but I don't feel that is outside of the region of the normal power scaling we get each expansion. A mixture of low gear and low understanding on the fights is partially to blame for them feeling like they hit like a truck. Really, they just hit a little bit harder. A bit harder's good though, I'm happy with that. A couple of standouts that I really want to glaze as being super fun are Protector, the second boss of the level 97 dungeon. This one replicates to a lesser extent the first boss of the Mount Rockon Criterion dungeon with the speedy AoE spam, and honestly it's super fun and cool as heck to do. I really enjoyed it, especially on my first run through as a healer trying to keep cast uptime. Then the mechanic where it puts up the laser fences and does a rotating AoE with random puddles littering the room alongside. This one was also super fun because it feels like you're traversing an obstacle course, and even as a melee you can keep full uptime if you're quick on your feet and zoom through the middle before the AoEs go off. It's just a bit chaotic, and I think that's where dungeons are at their best. Another dungeon I love is the first boss of the level 95 dungeon. You know, the one where you get to be a nuisance to your party. I just mentioned that chaotic bosses in dungeons are the best kind. They don't need to be difficult as such, they just need to have enough disarray to keep everybody on their toes. More than that, this boss is just joyful in that you can mess around with your team and have a good time, aiming AoEs at them and dodging one another's bubbles. I was leveling Warrior on stream with some friends and had this exact scenario, and honestly it was just hilarious, and in my opinion that alone makes a dungeon fight interesting and fun. There aren't a ton of brand new mechanics on the whole, but their implementation is absolutely more varied and unique than before, and that alone is enough to make it feel fresh. Aside from bosses, the trash and pacing both have a few things of note I want to touch on. Firstly, I've noticed that some mobs like doing these 30k plus tank busters during pulls, helping to make trash just a touch spicier. It's no crazy step up, but it's definitely a welcome addition. Ranged and melee mobs have been placed nicely along many of the duties, allowing your tank opportunities to position them nicely to get them grouped, and I like stuff like that existing. One thing I'm on the fence about is that they seem to love having one really tanky mob in a trash pull this expansion. Everything else dies super fast, and then there's one mob that has over twice the HP of everything else left over at the end. I don't really feel either way about that in particular, I'm fine with it I guess. However, there is something that I feel is implemented very poorly in Dawntrail, and that is the size of some of the pulls and their timing. I'm not a huge hater of single pulls, but when they chain multiple tiny pulls back to back in a frustrating manner, it's then that I stop having fun. The most egregious example of this is in the section between the second and third boss on the level 99 dungeon. This part is just plain not fun as far as I'm concerned. You pull 4 weak mobs before you run into a locked door. Okay, fair enough, you kill them. Then the door immediately whooshes open, and the 2 trash mobs that are waiting behind it run out and attack you. They're not even special mobs, it's just 2 extra guys that were waiting there. Once this is done, you continue walking forward, pick up 2 Cyclops dudes, go into the next room and find the Techno Tortoise. This tortoise has a bazillion HP and does no mechanics whatsoever aside from huge circle AoEs, and this entire pack is just miserable. It's so unfun that I try to do roulettes to get to 100 from 99 now, and whilst this is the most annoying one, there's a few other cases across the dungeons that are kind of similar. The level 100 dungeons deserve some kind of individual mention, I feel. Straber Deadwalk, the spooky theme park dungeon with a Nightmare Before Christmas vibe, may just be one of the most enjoyable dungeons I've ever done, and I mean that. The first time I did this dungeon was day 1 of early access with some members of my static, and we honestly spent most of its runtime in absolute tears of laughter. The first boss, where for getting hit by an AoE you get benoggined and get the hideous head thrown on you for 10 seconds, is absolute comedy. That moment where all the benoggins line up on the outside of the arena menacingly and you're expecting a slow and easy mechanic where they walk in a straight line or something, and then they start moving and chaos ensues. It's messy, exhilarating, and utterly hilarious. And if you mess up, you don't really feel bad about it. This is how expert roulette dungeons should be. I assumed there would be some people who had done this all correctly every time and never saw the benoggin, so I went into Duty Finder and got this clip specifically to you. And I'm really sorry to the guys I was with, because I got it like 3 times in a row. It doesn't stop there either. The second boss has simple follow the rotating AoE mechanics, but look how quick they are. They are so much faster than any other rotating mechanic in a dungeon. Maybe even ever, honestly. Fucking hell. It's not messing around. Even when it comes to the trash packs, harkening back to that first run I did, after the first boss, there's a Ferris wheel that is haunted by one of the ghosts, and then resultingly falls down on the party. Everyone else in my party was a little bit faster than me and didn't even notice that it had toppled. So when I took an auto attack from a stray mob and the Ferris wheel a second later, I instantly died and they all burst out laughing, confused as to what on earth happened. Debates like that are just fun, and I couldn't even be mad about the death because it was just so surprising. Tender Valley as well was just really good. If I talk too much about it, I feel like I'd be retreading what I've already said, but both expert dungeons are thematically fantastic, with bosses that are definitely a tad more interesting than those that have come in previous expansions. For the first time in many years, FF14 seems content in the fact that some players are going to mess up mechanics in casual content a few times before they get it down comfortably, and that they're going to die, and they've tuned around that expectation. The last boss of that dungeon, the Great Serpent of Toral, is one that honestly I didn't expect to see in a dungeon. Combining various line and circle AoEs into patterns and just saying find the safe spot usually feels reserved for slightly more difficult content, but here it is, present in a dungeon. They're really flexing the updated servers here as well. Mechanics with the update speed of those in the first boss of Straber just wouldn't be possible a few years back. They'd have some weird 3-second server tick update or something and just be miserable to do. I hope they can keep excelling when it comes to dungeons, because now I finally feel like I might enjoy doing expert roulette again. They aren't worlds apart from what came before, but they are very slightly elevated in difficulty, speed, and how interested they make me to do them. There were 3 trials added as well, 2 of which also received extreme trial variants. I'll discuss the level 100 trial first, then the 2 extremes. My first impressions were that holy fucking shit, I cannot wait to see the extreme of this. The normal mode wowed me. They managed to take a bunch of overused old mechanics and repackage them in a way that enthralled me. It was fantastic. The music was truly unmatched the entire time, and somehow Sokun just keeps bettering himself with every expansion that goes by. And I got shivers at the last phase thanks to his incredible work. The mechanic where the floor changes and the boss attempts to suck players in by manipulating the arena are basically just reskinned telegraphed AoEs. But what makes them exhilarating is that if you get caught, you're just dead instantly. On my first run, watching a handful of people just get sucked up by it the first time I saw it and immediately hit the mud was unexpected. And you could tell people respected the mechanic way more after seeing it, myself included. Then, you get to the mechanic where the line AoE tethers 2 players and will shoot at the average of their 2 positions relative to it. This one is super cool as well, and the first thing was just me imagining some wild potential combinations for the extreme. Like, imagine all 8 players being tethered in pairs to 4 of these lasers coming from different cardinal directions, and you need to find safe spots for your pair whilst avoiding all of the other pairs, and at the same time there's boss attacks and floor hazards incoming. It sounds like chaos, it sounds like a lot of fun, and I really hope to see that they push this concept further in patch 7.1 when the extreme releases. The other mechanic I'm really excited about is this Takeshi's Castle moment, where you have the constantly changing gravity, small safe platforms, and the wall with convenient player-shaped holes positioned across it. That's right, a hole just for you. This is the best and most fun implementation of the gravity mechanic yet. Heck, just focus the fight on that at its core, it was that cool. Man, I cannot wait to see the extreme. Please, please, please do not be another Endsinger. This could be so good if they do justice to the potential of the normal mode. Valley Garmander was the first Dawntrail trial, with a level 93 normal mode and a level 100 extreme. I think this is just a by-the-book solid FF14 encounter, following most of the traditional design decisions in terms of mechanical type and cadence that we've seen a lot. But once again, the speed is definitely tuned up a notch. They expect you to react just a little bit quicker than something like, say, Zodiac and Hydaelyn would. It's not a super difficult extreme trial by any means, in fact it's actually quite easy, but what they've done here is made it quite fast but not very punishing. If you get hit, in most cases you get a damage down or a vuln. With a little mitigation, most things don't even insta-kill you, and you get the opportunity to learn from your mistakes and continue the pull, gaining a lot of information in a single attempt. There's a ton of simple pattern recognition and core mechanics we've all seen before. Stacks, spreads, twisters, ice, keep moving, stop standing still right nows, but there are also some really unique set pieces. Here I'm talking about the Tank Buster Tower. It's such a simple alteration, making the Buster do the huge cleave and making it hit 6 times back to back, as the group scrambles to match the boss's movements as it attacks again and again, the tanks needing to stagger their mitigation and swap each tower to ensure they're sufficiently protecting themselves and the party. This is exactly what I meant in my Endwalker videos when I requested more active tanking that wasn't intended just as a kitchen sink swap moment. This isn't complex or tough by any means, but it's incredibly cool and it incentivizes you to stagger your cooldowns. I also quite like Spikecycle a lot and how it makes you thread the needle a decent amount. That's a very enjoyable movement mechanic to resolve as a caster. One thing I want to touch on is the damage. It doesn't feel like it hits exceptionally hard, maybe a little higher than average but not a ton, but what is interesting is how they utilize damage over time to make your life harder. For the entire second half of the encounter, you have a persistent dot running on the entire party, and Valley Garmander loves to enter phase changes by smacking you with a second one, then quickly following it up with an AoE hit afterwards. This isn't usually a direct threat to your life, but what it does instead is interferes with your ability to preset up large shields, like spread out lows or shake it off buffs. This means that you often either have to be a little more thoughtful when it comes to the timing of your shields before incoming raid damages, or you need to instead invest more mitigation to account for the fact that your shields likely won't be at maximum strength. This is cool, and I think it's a nice way to ease players in without straight up doubling the incoming hits. The Ad Phase 2 hits pretty hard. That's a pretty fun one to deal with as well as a healer. I honestly just really enjoyed Valley Garmander on the whole. Zoralja is a completely different type of fight. This one is much more puzzle based, and honestly 75% of its runtime feels like a solo encounter where you're dealing with your own mechanics and you don't interact too heavily with the rest of the party. If you mess up, you're the one that gets punished, and the others continue mostly unscathed for the majority of this encounter. The sword puzzles with the elements actually threw me for a loop for a couple of pulls. Now I can do them almost immediately, but they have you passing through quite a lot of information in a relatively low amount of time. Makes a nice change from the other extreme and tests very different skills. My favourite mechanics on the whole are the one that people are cheesing, where you need to pop your stack debuffs on the ever moving wall, juggling between having enough players in the stack to survive each incoming hit and popping the stacks quickly enough. Admittedly, they do give you so much time to resolve it that this decision isn't really impactful, but what I especially like is that there are so many different ways to successfully resolve this mechanic. That's good, and I really enjoy mechanics that promote creativity from players like this. There's another one too. I've actually forgotten the name of it, but the mechanic that incidentally also uses moving lines, this time instead of stacks they use dynamos and chariots, donuts and circle AoEs. I've mentioned that I want more chaos a lot in this video. This mechanic is chaos. Watching people running all over the place like lemmings collecting Vuln stacks is kinda hilarious. And for a mechanic with a million different ways to successfully plan your movement, where you really don't need to interact with your party, you just need to dodge the AoEs, it can just be interesting to see what the other guys are doing once you get to your spot. Both of these mechanics were a joy for me. One thing about this fight though is that it's kind of uninteresting to heal. Aside from the stacks mechanic, and when those surprisingly spicy stack damages occur that apply magic vulns with every hit, there's just kind of nothing going on at all. In that regard, it's a bit disappointing. So my overall impressions are that Dawntrail's battle content so far has been an absolute joy. There's been some low moments, but the highs are definitely there way more often, and they are high enough that my hopes are well and truly set on this upcoming Savage tier being a banger. The real question to me now is, can they keep this up? We're right at the start of the expansion. Where are we going to be a year from now? Are we going to be celebrating 3 patches of incredible content, or are we going to be thinking about where it all went wrong? If this is a starting point, then Dawntrail could be something truly special for active players. I'm feeling very positively about the future, and with Savage in just a few weeks, I'm really hoping that I look back on this video and think, yeah, this cool first few weeks was just the start of an awesome expansion. Really, this video exists for 2 reasons. I wanted to yap a bit, But also I wanted to get your thoughts as well. How are you enjoying Dawntrail so far? What's been your highlight? Please do let me know in the comments section because I'm genuinely very interested to get feedback from other players. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.